All right, folks, I am sitting in my car on my lunch break. I finally figured out when I can actually have some time to work on videos. I wanted to take this time, because I actually have time, which I'm very excited about, and do a little bit more of the book review of The Tactical Guide to Women. We're on chapter 3 right now, and I'm excited. Like, I finally got a little bit of time. I've got 1 hour a day that I can carve out for myself that I can actually start working on this. So let's see how far we get. Do you want to know one of the most common complaints women have about their husbands and partners? He changed. Many women feel deceived when the man they married turns out to be someone other than who they thought he was. This is actually something that I experienced in my marriage. Granted, it was the result of a brain tumor. My husband didn't really change. He just developed a brain tumor, and then we gave him some medication and it went away. But that was the complaint that I had. I wanted him to I married him because I wanted him to be exactly the way he was. And that's probably a good thing, as weird as that might sound. There are women who get into relationships with men and men who get into relationships with women, but right now we're talking in the opposite direction. People will get into relationships with other people and they're like, oh, they're perfect if they could just get rid of this one thing. Um, and like one of the just very, very early on, and I had already heard this, so it didn't surprise me when I started seeing it in the relationships that I got into. If someone's not perfect the way they are when you're dating them, don't expect to change them. If you start dating someone, it's like, oh, they're wonderful except for this huge glaring flaw, but I can fix them. I can change them. Women have that idea. Like a lot of women have that idea. He's perfect. I can smooth out the rough edges. It's like, no, take them exactly as they find them. Rough edges and all. If they're not good enough that way, don't go expecting them to change just because they love you or like you or whatever. And I remember one particular guy I met, and I was talking with him, like not in the dating sense at all. He was asking me for dating advice. He was an alcoholic, and it was like, well, you gotta quit the alcohol. He's like, why does everybody keep saying that? Can't anybody just love me for me? It's like, well, what do you bring to the table? What do you have to offer? He's like, I don't know. I'm a nice guy. I'm like, so is everybody else. If you're looking for a partner, you kind of want somebody who's stable and healthy on their own without you having to change anything. Because the changes don't stick. A lot of the time, the changes don't stick. So, going into detail about that change that women complain about, she sees what looks like a change of character, which raises the fear that she fundamentally misjudged her man's personality. You can imagine how disruptive this would feel to a woman after she has rearranged her life around you. And this would be disruptive to a man's life too. I mean, this book is primarily for men who want to date women, but if you get together with someone and then they change in some way, it's really kind of upsetting. So imagine that you married a very, very hot woman, very, very sexy, great body. You marry her, everything's good, and then she just starts packing on weight like there's no tomorrow. And you're looking at this very, very portly woman who just doesn't look as good as she used to, and you're sitting there going, what happened? What went wrong here? Um, this is kind of what happens with women. We don't necessarily select as much for visual. We do select for visual. Some guys are like, oh, the way you look doesn't matter at all. Oh no, trust me, the way you look matters. But your personality, our sense of connection, our sense of familiarity with you, that all plays in. And so if you change, we get a little freaked out. Continuing on our risk management foundation, we're going to focus on giving her an accurate picture of yourself from the beginning. We want her to make an informed decision, and the most accurate impression comes from action more than words. One of the things I really, really like about this book, and I think he mentions it later on in this chapter too, is the idea that when you're dating someone, you need to be honest with them. You need to be very straightforward. You need to be very honest. You need to be honest about who you are. Because dating somebody is like a giant advertisement for yourself. This is the product that you are going to be getting in this relationship. And the pickup artist, like a lot of pickup artistry, and I mean there's some good stuff that you can get from pickup artistry. Namely, if you are too afraid to walk up and talk to a pretty girl, here's how you walk up and break the ice with a pretty girl. But there's some stuff about pickup artistry that just it doesn't work so well. It's like, oh, just lie to her. Oh, you want her to like you? Just lie to her a lot. That's not going to work as a long-term strategy at all. That's not going to attract you a high-quality woman, because if you're just trying to get in bed with someone, well, you're going to end up getting in bed with someone who's lower quality than what you might otherwise have gotten. And if you're looking for anybody that you want to keep for any kind of a long-term relationship, lying is the worst possible way to do it. So I really like the fact that he really puts forward an approach that involves honesty, or revolves around honesty. Most male suicides occur in midlife and old age, precisely the times when mastery and social position can be unceremoniously lost to injury or circumstance, or when it recedes naturally and isn't replaced with meaningful activities in retirement. This was really interesting to me. Um, I had to check and make sure that it was still recording. This was really interesting to me because I knew that more men successfully commit suicide than women. I did not realize that it was older men who committed, like middle-aged, older-aged men who successfully committed more suicides. Um, I honestly thought it would be younger men. For some reason, I figured that younger men are a little bit more full of pep and vinegar. As you get older, you tend to settle down. You tend to realize, at least for me, it's been the experience. As I get older, I tend to settle down and realize that as horrible as my circumstances might be, circumstances are very prone to change. And so then I just kind of sit tight and weather whichever storm I'm going through. Um, but it makes a lot of sense as he's talking about it. Men build up a sense of prestige. They build up a sense of power. They build up their sexual market value. And so, because it's not just are you pretty or are you not pretty, which seems to be the way it tends to work for women, it's more for men, prestige, social standing, um, valuable assets. And so if those things go away, and one of the things that he's talking not so much about the stuff you have as the meaning that you have in life. So does your work give you meaning? Does your spouse and your family give you meaning? Well, these are things that can be taken away from a man. So if he loses them, suddenly his life seems very meaningless, and he's thrown into this kind of chaos, which can be very, very destructive. The beautiful part? For a mere 40 hours per week, a man can enjoy prestige in the eyes of his loved ones and his colleagues, provided he shows up with intention and effort. He's talking about things that give men meaning in their lives, and I thought this was really interesting because it's very easy, possibly just in my generation, but it's very easy for people to look at a job and judge it. It's like, oh, well, you work as a janitor, you're not as valuable as a heart surgeon. So there is no prestige there. But that's not entirely true. Um, any job that you go to with a sense of intention and effort, as he just said, but with a sense of purpose and a sense of excellence, is going to be a fulfilling job. And if you're fulfilled by your job, even if it's not a particularly glamorous job, that's a meaningful thing. And this section of the chapter is about generating meaning in your life. It's not necessarily about generating stuff that other people care about. Um, Stuff that other people care about is other people's opinions and other people's ideas. That's very superficial. People are superficial. Other people's opinions of you are going to be very superficial. What you need is something that is meaningful to you. So if you have a job, it might not be the world's most glamorous job, but if it's meaningful to you, then that's important. Clarity of purpose minimizes your risk by helping a woman know exactly what she's getting into. As an aside, this forthrightness is one of the areas in which I part ways with the pickup artist community. Not all pickup artistry is bad. Techniques that help shy men approach women can be great fun, and they don't automatically increase your risk of partnering with the wrong one. However, pickup artistry becomes a danger to you when it veers into dishonesty or manipulation. And I remember doing the review of, what is it called? I can't remember the name of the book now. The Mystery Method. I had to go and look it up. Yeah, the point, it wasn't a bad book itself. Well, it wasn't a great book, but it wasn't a bad book. The problem was when he started talking about how to manipulate women, and it's kind of like, this is really sleazy. And I mean, I was trying to be as open minded about it as possible. It's like I understand that men do need kind of advice on how to talk to women because it can be really terrifying trying to talk to a pretty girl. God knows I never got good at it. Back before I met my husband, back when I was trying to date women, I was terrified of talking to women that I found attractive. And so I can sympathize. And I was really lucky because if I got too burnt out on women, I could just go date men. You guys don't necessarily have that option as much. Um, but yeah, the point at which you have to lie or trick, deceive or manipulate, it's just bad. It's bad for a relationship. You cannot build a good relationship that way. You've probably heard women complain that men are overly competitive and that we just can't get along as well as women. During my decade in higher education, I got an earful of uninformed twaddle about toxic masculinity. We're unemotional, they say. We're aggressive. We're too individualistic. We suffer in self imposed patriarchy that is harmful to men, women, and all the little bunnies in the forest. I love his sense of humor in his writing, but also I like the fact that he's kind of calling out that bullshit is exactly what it is. It is bullshit. And he goes on. The truth is that men are sometimes more skilled at relationships than women. We have more of an innate team mentality and we cooperate more, especially when we're competing with other groups of men or tackling a challenging problem. And he has some interesting scientific facts about pheromones, and it's really interesting. I highly recommend you guys get this book and read it. I'm not going to go through all of those. But I believe him. I honestly believe him. I've worked with men and I've worked with women, and the men work and the women are very prone, not all women, but women tend to be very prone to falling into bickering and fighting and cliques, and I can't handle that shit. I hang out with men. I prefer working with men as a general rule. Right now, actually, I am working for a woman, and she's really good at her job, so I'm fine with that. But generally speaking, prefer to work with men. And one of the problems that I have being female is that when I come into a group of men, it takes them a little while to kind of relax around me because they have to realize that I'm one of the guys. Um, I'm never really one of the guys, but I try my very best. Because I'd very much rather be just one of the guys. Being a woman, like, working with women can be really difficult. As Professor Benenson points out, male social groups and work groups are similar in structure to military organizations, with each man having a few close friends, his squad, a larger circle of associates, his platoon, and ever expanding less familiar groups, his company, his battalion, and so on. I thought this was really interesting because it makes a lot of sense. Men, traditionally and throughout most of human history, men have been the ones organizing militaries. In our ancient prehistoric tribal gatherings and groups, men were organizing any kind of violence, any kind of raids or warfare that would be going on. And so, as war has evolved, men are almost always the architects. And you can get angry at men for being the architects of war, but, wars happen. Someone needs to go and do it. It's the unpleasant job that needs to be done that men generally end up doing because men are more well equipped to do it. So I don't necessarily blame men for being the architects of war, but because men are the architects of war, it makes sense that a lot of the structure of militaries tends to be very reflective in a very interesting way of the male mindset and the male psyche. So that's really cool. I thought that was interesting. I'm sure that someone's going to take that and use it as a see all men are bad kind of thing. But I mean, no, it's just it's fascinating. This is how men think, and so this is how men organize themselves. And a military is a place where men organize themselves, so it makes sense. Girls, on the other hand, tend to organize in pairs, and women tend to organize in flat, leaderless groups. If my female friends and associates are to be taken at their word, there's a great deal more bickering within all female groups than within groups of men. And once again, this is why I like hanging out with men. It's really funny because I went and I hung out. It was a mixed group. It wasn't entirely populated by women, but it was just last week I went and hung out with a bunch of male friends of mine, and there were a few female friends, but they were lesbians, and we're all just kind of sitting together, and I had brought along some sweet tea to give to everybody. And it's really funny because we have a leader in our group, and immediately the leader just kind of took over operations. And I was really grateful because I'm not the most socially skilled of people. I'm not particularly socially grateful. So I brought the tea and I just kind of set it down in the middle of the table. And he immediately takes over pouring and distributing it. And of course, then everybody drinks it. Now, I've come over when he's not around, and I brought sweet tea over to everybody when he's not around, and nobody drinks it. And it just kind of, kind of I was sitting there and I was wondering if maybe I'm just not socially particularly clued in, and that's the reason it didn't occur to me to pour the sweet tea for everybody, or if it's just having a leader around to actually take over and do things. Like, it was a very interesting thing for me. As far as women in groups, I avoid groups of women for precisely this reason. I've met plenty of men who were more interested in an entertaining life than a long one. I love that. I am very much like that. I would much rather have an entertaining life than a long one. I'd like to have both, honestly. My family tends to be very long lived, and so I looked at it and it's like, well, I want to live a long time because there's a million things I want to try out, and I want to try out all of them, and so that's going to take a lot of time. So I need to live a long life because I need to try this, and I need to try this, and I need to go over here and do this other thing, and that's just kind of who I am. So I'm hoping on living a long life, and I'm trying to squeeze as many experiences and activities into that life as I possibly can, which is why I have 4 children right now, because I wanted to get the whole experience before I moved on to the next thing. And my God, have I gotten the whole experience. But apparently, there are a lot of men who are like that. The man who knows he's serving a purpose and doing it well is on top of the world. There's no pill, no pep talk, no wisdom from the mountaintop that can outclass a solid sense of effectiveness. It may be the cornerstone of male mental health and happiness. That's wonderful. That's good information to have. At the time that I was reading this, I thought about it more. Now I'm just kind of sitting and scrambling, trying to think about what my thoughts were, because I took notes and then I have them sitting on a bookshelf for the longest time, haven't been able to film. Um, I'm trying to figure out if women operate that way as well. And I honestly am probably not the best person to ask because I tend to be rather atypical as a woman. And I don't know if I'm atypical as a woman or just atypical as a human being. And I'm wondering how much of that is the fact that I have bipolar, because now that I'm aware I have bipolar, I'm looking at myself and thinking, okay, how much of my highly atypical behaviors and thinking patterns is just the result of having a a mental disorder, a mental health disorder, I suppose it's called. Someone called me neurodiverse. I know that's usually used with autism, but it might apply to me as well. I tend to be a little bit odd, and now I actually have a diagnosis. So instead of saying, "Hey, I'm just an oddball," I can say, "Hey, I have bipolar disorder." Although I seem to be a little bit of an oddball for bipolar disorder too. I have type 2, and most people with type 2 tend to spend like a 35-to-1 ratio of depression to mania. They tend to spend much more time depressed. I honestly don't know how much time I spend depressed, but I know that I spend a lot of time in states of euphoria. And God knows I pursue those states of euphoria doggedly, because who doesn't want to be high all the time? Um, but I might be a little bit of an oddball even for a person with bipolar, and that's because of the hyperthymia, the tendency to be just in a much more elevated mood state. Do women benefit from a sense of effectiveness in the same way that men do? I honestly don't know. Off the top of my head, I can't say. Um, but that's not the important issue right at the moment. The important issue is that men do benefit from a solid sense of effectiveness. Do you feel like what you do in the world actually matters? And I'm not necessarily to your mom or your dad or your girlfriend or your wife. Does it matter to you? Does it mean something to you? When you go to bed at the end of the day, do you say, "Oh, did I do something today?" Or, do you feel like you wasted that day? Did you feel like you wasted your life? Because that's not so good. I would imagine that nobody wants to go to bed at the end of the day feeling like they wasted their life. at least that day of their life, because days they bleed by very quickly. Time is very precious. Men in great relationships possess something more valuable than brass balls or perfection of spirit. They're willing to assess themselves honestly. It's no guarantee of meeting the woman of your dreams, but it is the best way I know to keep the wrong women at a safe distance. This is interesting too. Um, I think a lot of men in the manosphere get tied up in the idea of self perfection, and I think that's very valuable. Okay, it is still working. I think a lot of men in the manosphere get tied up in the idea of self-perfection, and that's very valuable. Self-improvement is extremely valuable, and self-improvement will make you more attractive to potential partners. But what he's talking about here, it's one of those things where you peel back layers. The first layer, oh, that dude's hot, and so he can attract women. And it's like, well, how do you attract women? Well, you got to be that dude. Well, what if you're not that dude? Then I guess it just sucks. No, you peel back that layer and it's like, no, you improve yourself. You make yourself a person who can be attractive to women. Then you say, okay, well, you be attracted to women by improving yourself and making yourself the best person possible. Well, that's wonderful. But if you peel back that layer, how do you make yourself attractive to women? Well, you have to be honest with yourself. That's the very first step, the step before those other steps. Um, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to look at yourself honestly. It's what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? But also, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing in the world? What means something to me? What is meaningful about my life to me? Those are very, very important questions. And if you're going to be building yourself up, that's the first step. Then after asking those questions, then you can get into the whole self-improvement, self-perfection thing. But if you don't get that very, very first step of can you assess yourself honestly, everything you build after that is going to be sitting on a slightly crooked foundation. I love that he mentions this because it makes a lot of sense. In fairness, you can argue that too few women have been exposed to the upside of masculinity. Popular culture often showcases men who behave dishonorably, and I suspect there are some folks who disdain masculinity because they've never seen a good example of the genuine article. That brings me right back to No More Mr. Nice Guy, where if you haven't been around a good, healthy example of masculinity, it's really hard to figure out as a man how to be a healthily masculine individual. And I've seen this in men. And it always kind of makes me sad because I adore men and I adore masculinity. And it's like, this is a wonderful thing. But if you haven't seen the positive sides of it, you don't know how to appreciate it. And so I love that he, in this book, really embraces the healthy and functional aspects of the masculine spirit and what masculinity is. That's very beautiful to me. And so that's actually the end of the chapter. And it's probably a good thing because I have to scarf down some peanut butter and call it a break and head back to work. So hopefully I will get this out to you guys soon and I will talk to you later.